Let's resume, shall we? Chapter 13. Mr. Marvel discusses his resignation. When the dusk was gathering and I Ping was just beginning to peep timorously forth again upon the shattered wreckage of its bank holiday, a short, thick-set man in a shabby silk hat was marching painfully through the twilight behind the beechwoods on the road to Bramblehurst. He carried 3 books bound together by some sort of ornamental elastic ligature and a bundle wrapped in a blue tablecloth. His rubicund face expressed consternation and fatigue. What? It's time for a vocabulary word already. His rubicund face. Okay.
Rubicund.
Sorry, rubicund. Having a ruddy complexion, high colored. Ruddy is reddish, like blood. We're talking about white guy here, so yeah, his reddish face. What was that other word? Timorously, I forgot what that meant. Here, timorously. Timorously, showing or suffering from nervousness, fear, or a lack of confidence. Timorously. And there we are. His rubicund face expressed consternation and fatigue. He appeared to be in a spasmodic sort of hurry. He was accompanied by a voice rather than his own, and ever again he winced under the touch of unseen hands. "If you give me the slip again," said the voice, "if you attempt to give me the slip again." "Lord," said Mr. Marvel, "that shoulder's a mass of bruises as it is." "On my honor," said the voice, "I will kill you." "I didn't try to give you the slip," said Marvel in a voice that was not far remote from tears. "I swear I didn't. I didn't know the blessed turning, that was all. How the devil's like to know the blessed turning? As it is, I've been knocked about." "You will get knocked about a great deal more if you don't mind," said the voice, and Mr. Marvel abruptly became silent. He blew out his cheeks, and his eyes were eloquent of despair. "It's bad enough to let these floundering yokels explode my little secret without your cutting off with my books. It's lucky for some of them they cut and ran when they did. Here I am. No one knew I was invisible, and now, what am I to do?" "What am I to do?" asked Marvel, sotto voce. Sotto voce. Forgot what that means. Again. In a quiet voice as if not to be overheard.
Sotto voce.
Sotto voce. Quietly, then. Where was I? Yes. "What am I to do?" asked Marvel sotto voce. "It's all about. It will be in the papers. Everybody will be looking for me, everyone on their guard." The voice broke off into vivid curses and ceased. The despair of Mr. Marvel's face deepened, and his pace slackened. "Go on," said the voice. Mr. Marvel's face assumed a grayish tint between the ruddier patches. "Don't drop those books, stupid," said the voice sharply, overtaking him. "The fact is," said the voice, "I shall have to make use of you. You're a poor tool, but I must." "I'm a miserable tool," said Marvel. "You are," said the voice. "I'm the worst possible tool you could have," said Marvel. "I'm not strong," he said after a discouraging silence. "I'm not overstrong," he repeated. "No, and my heart's weak, that little business. I pulled through, of course, but bless you, I could have dropped." I haven't, well, I haven't the nerve and strength for the sort of thing you want. I'll stimulate you. I wish you wouldn't. I wouldn't like to mess up your plans, you know, but I might, out of sheer funk and misery. You'd better not, said the voice with quiet emphasis. I wish I was dead, said Marvel. It ain't justice, he said. You must admit, it seems to me I have a perfect right. Get on, said the voice. Mr. Marvel mended his pace, and for a time they went in silence again. It's devilish hard, said Mr. Marvel. This was quite ineffectual. He tried another track. What do I make by it? He began again in a tone of unendurable wrong. Oh, shut up, said the voice, with sudden amazing vigor. I'll see to you all right. You do what you told. You'll do it all right. You're a fool and all that, but you'll do. I tell you, sir, I'm not the man for it. Respectfully, but it is so. If you don't shut up, I shall twist your wrist again, said the invisible man. I want to think. Presently, two oblongs of yellow light appeared through the trees, and the square tower of the church loomed over through the gloaming. I shall keep my hand on your shoulder, said the voice, all through the village. Go straight through and try no foolery. It will be the worse for you if you do. I know that, sighed Mr. Marvel. I know all that. The unhappy-looking figure in the obsolete silk hat passed up the street of the little village with his burdens and vanished into the gathering darkness beyond the lights of the windows. Chapter 14 at Port Stowe. 10 o'clock in the morning found Mr. Marvel unshaven, dirty, and travel-stained, sitting with the books beside him and his hands deep in his pockets, looking very weary, nervous, and uncomfortable, and inflating his cheeks at infrequent intervals on the bench outside a little inn on the outskirts of Port Stowe. Beside him were the books, but now they were tied with string. The bundle had been abandoned in the pine woods beyond Bramble Burst. In accordance with the change in the plans of the Invisible Man, Mr. Marvel sat on one bench, and although no one took the slightest notice of him, his agitation remained at fever heat. His hands would go ever and again to his various pockets with a curious nervous fumbling. When he had been sitting for the best part of an hour, however, an elderly mariner, carrying a newspaper, came out of the inn and sat down beside him. Pleasant day, said the mariner. Mr. Marvel glanced about him with something very like terror. Very, he said. Just seasonable weather for the time of year, said the mariner, taking no denial. Quite, said Mr. Marvel. The mariner produced a toothpick and, saving his regard, was engrossed thereby for some minutes. His eyes, meanwhile, were at liberty to examine Mr. Marvel's dusty figure and the books beside him. As he had approached Mr. Marvel, he had heard a sound like the dropping of coins into a pocket. He was struck by the contrast of Mr. Marvel's appearance with his suggestion of opulence. Thence his mind wandered back again to a topic that had taken a curiously firm hold of his imagination. Books, he said suddenly, noisily finishing with a toothpick. Mr. Marvel started and looked at them. Oh, yes, he said. Yes, they're books. There are some extraordinary things in those books, said the mariner. I believe you, said Mr. Marvel. And some extraordinary things out of them, said the mariner. True, likewise, said Mr. Marvel. He eyed his interlocutor, then glanced about him. There's some extraordinary things in newspapers, for example, said the mariner. There are? In this newspaper, said the mariner. Ah, said Mr. Marvel. There's a story, said the mariner, fixing Mr. Marvel in an eye that was firm and deliberate. There's a story about an invisible man, for instance. Mr. Marvel pulled his mouth askew and scratched his cheek and felt his ears glowing. What will they be writing next? He asked faintly. Austria or America? Neither, said the mariner. Here. Lord, said Mr. Marvel, starting. When I say here, said the mariner, to Mr. Marvel's intense relief, I don't of course mean here in this place. I mean hereabouts. An invisible man, said Mr. Marvel. And what's he been up to? Everything, said the mariner, controlling Marvel with his eye and then amplifying. Every blessed thing. I ain't seen a newspaper these 4 days, said Marvel. I ping's the place he started at, said the mariner. Indeed, said Mr. Marvel. He started there, and where he came from nobody don't seem to know. Here it is. Peculiar story from my ping, and it says in this paper that the evidence is extraordinary strong. Extraordinary. Lord, said Mr. Marvel. But then it's an extraordinary story. There's a clergyman and a medical gent witnesses saw him all right and proper, or leastways didn't see him. He was staying, it says, at the Coach and Horses, and no one don't seem to have been aware of his misfortune. It says aware of his misfortune until an altercation in the inn, it says. His bandages on his head was torn off. It was then observed that his head was invisible. Attempts were at once made to secure him, but casting off his garments, it says, he succeeded in escaping. But not until after a desperate struggle in which he had inflicted serious injuries, it says, on our worthy and able constable, Mr. J.A. Jaffers. Pretty straight story, eh? Names and everything. Lord, said Mr. Marvel, looking nervously about him, trying to count the money in his pockets by his unaided sense of touch, and full of a strange and novel idea. It sounds most astonishing. Don't it? Extraordinary, I call it. Never heard tell of invisible men before. I haven't, but nowadays one hears such a lot of extraordinary things that... That all he did? Asked Marvel, trying to seem at his ease. Oh, hey, Gaming Templar. Just wanted to swing by and say hello before I crash for the night. Sorry because I haven't been active as much, but sorry because of work and school kicking my butt. I hope you are doing well, this noob. Hey, thank you, Gaming Templar. Actually, I haven't been streaming as I normally have anyway, just due to working overtime. So thanks for dropping by. Don't worry about it. Good to see you again. Hope you graduate soon. Okay, where was I? That all he did? Asked Marvel, trying to seem at his ease. It's enough, ain't it? Said the mariner. Didn't go back by any chance? Asked Marvel. Just escaped, and that's all, eh? All? Said the mariner. Why, ain't it enough? Quite enough, said Marvel. I should think it was enough, said the mariner. I should think it was enough. He didn't have any pals? It don't say he had any pals, does it? Asked Mr. Marvel, anxious. Ain't one of a sort enough for you? Asked the mariner. No, thank heaven, as one might say, he didn't. He nodded his head slowly. It makes me regular uncomfortable. The bare thought of that chap running about the country. He is at present at large, and from certain evidence it is supposed that he has took, I suppose they mean, the road to Port Stowe. You see, we're right in it. None of your American wonders this time. And just think of the things he might do. Where'd you be if he took a drop over and above and had a fancy to go for you? Suppose he wants to rob. Who can prevent him? He can trespass. He can burgle. He could walk through a cordon of policemen as easy as me or you could give the slip to a blind man. Easier. For these here blind chaps here uncommon sharp, I'm told, and wherever there was liquor, he fancied. He's got a tremendous advantage, certainly, said Marvel. I'm flying out to California, April 4th, San Diego, so I'll be on your time so I can catch your streams your time. Awesome, Gaming Templar. Okay, where was I? Sorry. He's got a tremendous advantage, certainly, said Mr. Marvel. And, well, you're right, said the mariner. He has. All this time, Mr. Marvel had been glancing about him intently, listening for faint footfalls, trying to detect imperceptible movements. He seemed on the point of some great resolution. He coughed behind his hand. He looked about him again, listened, bent towards the mariner, and lowered his voice. The fact of it is, I happen to know just a thing or two about this invisible man from private sources. Oh, said the mariner, interested. You? Yes, said Mr. Marvel. Me. Indeed, said the mariner, and may I ask? You'll be astonished, said Mr. Marvel behind his hand. It's tremendous. Indeed, said the mariner. The fact is, began Mr. Marvel eagerly in a confidential undertone. Suddenly his expression changed marvelously. Ow! He said. He rose stiffly in his seat. His face was eloquent of physical suffering. Wow, he said. What's up? Said the mariner, concerned. Toothache, said Mr. Marvel, and he put his hand to his ear. He caught hold of his books. I must be getting on, I think. He edged in a curious way along the seat away from his interlocutor. But you was just a-going to tell me about this here invisible man, protested the mariner. Mr. Marvel seemed to consult with himself. Hoax, said a voice. It's a hoax, said Mr. Marvel. But it's in the paper, said the mariner. Hoax all the same, said Marvel. I know the chap that started the lie. There ain't no invisible man whatsoever, blimey. But how about this paper? Don't you mean to say... Not a word of it, said Marvel, stoutly. The mariner stared, paper in hand. Mr. Marvel jerkily faced about. Wait a bit, said the mariner, using and speaking slowly. Do you mean to say... I do, said Mr. Marvel. Then why did you let me go on and tell you all this blarsted stuff, then? What do you mean you're letting man making a fool of himself like that for, eh? Mr. Marvel blew out his cheeks. The mariner was suddenly very red indeed. He clenched his hands. I've been talking here this 10 minutes, he said, and you little pot-bellied, leathery-faced son of an old boot, couldn't have the elementary manners. Don't you come bandying words with me, said Mr. Marvel. Bandying words? I'm a jolly good mind. Come up, said a voice, and Mr. Marvel was suddenly whirled about and started marching off in a curious, spasmodic manner. You'd better move on, said the mariner. Who's moving on? Said Mr. Marvel. He was receding obliquely with a curious hurrying gait, with occasional violent jerks forward. Some way along the road he began a muttered monologue, protests and recriminations. Silly devil, said the mariner, legs wide apart, elbows akimbo, watching the receding figure. I'll show you, you silly ass. Hoaxing me? It's here, on the paper. And there was another extraordinary thing he was presently to hear that had happened quite close to him, and that was a vision of a fist full of money, no less, traveling without invisible agency, along by the wall at the corner of St. Michael's Lane. A brother mariner had seen this wonderful sight that very morning. He had snatched at the money forthwith and been knocked headlong. When he had got to his feet, the butterfly money had vanished. Our mariner was in the mood to believe anything, he declared, but that was a bit too stiff. Oh, sorry. Afterwards, however, he began to think things over. Sorry, I need to move the mic a little bit. I think it's too low. Oh, here. Oh, my face revealed. Horrifying. There we go. Just trying to get it close to my mouth there. Okay, where was I? Afterwards, however, he began to think things over. The story of the flying money was true, and all about that neighborhood, even from the August London and Country Banking Company, from the tills of the shops and inns, doors standing that sunny weather entirely open. Money had been quietly and dexterously making off that day in handfuls, and rouleaux, floating quietly along by walls and shady places, dodging quickly from the approaching eyes of men. Hold on, this word is French. I'm not sure I'm saying it right. Was it? Yeah, rouleau, I think. Let's make sure. Wait, spell it right. Nope, spelled it wrong. I must be tired because I can't even write this. Rouleau, pretty close. A cylindrical packet of coins. Ah, yes, he's stealing coins from the bank. Rouleau. Money had been quietly and dexterously making off that day in handfuls in rouleaux, floating quietly along by walls and shady places, dodging quickly from the approaching eyes of men, and it had, though no man had traced it, invariably ended its mysterious flight in the pocket of that agitated gentleman in the obsolete silk hat, sitting outside the little inn on the outskirts of Port Stowe. It was 10 days after, and indeed only when the Burdock story was already old, that the mariner collated these facts and began to understand how near he had been to the wonderful Invisible Man. Chapter 15. The Man Who Was Running. In the early evening, Dr. Kemp was sitting in his study in the Belvedere on the hill overlooking Burdock. Belvedere. That's a word I've heard, but I don't know what it means. Belvedere. A summer house or open-sided gallery, usually at rooftop level, commanding a fine view. Summer house or open-sided gallery. Okay. In the early evening time, Dr. Kemp was sitting in his study in the Belvedere on the hill overlooking Burdock. It was a pleasant little room with 3 windows, northwest and south, and bookshelves covered with books and scientific publications, and a broad writing table, and, under the north window, a microscope, glass slips, minute instruments, some cultures, and scattered bottles of reagents. Dr. Kemp's solar lamp was lit, albeit the sky was still bright with the sunset light, and his blinds were up because there was no offense of peering outsiders to require them pulled down. Dr. Kemp was a tall and slender young man with flaxen hair and a mustache almost white, and the work he did would earn him, he hoped, the fellowship of the Royal Society. So highly did he think of it. And his eye, presently wandering from his work, caught the sunset blazing at the back of the hill that is over against his own. For a minute, perhaps, he sat, pen in mouth, admiring the rich golden color above the crest, and then his attention was attracted by the little figure of a man, inky black, running over the hill brow towards him. He was a shortish little man, and he wore a high hat, and he was running so fast that his legs verily twinkled. "Another of those fools," said Dr. Kemp, "like that ass who ran into me this morning round a corner with the 'Visible Man a-coming, sir.' I can't imagine what possessed people. One might think we're in the 13th century." He got up, went to the window, and stared at the dusky hillside and the dark little figure tearing down it. He seems in a confounded hurry, said Dr. Kemp, but he doesn't seem to be getting on. If his pockets were full of lead, he couldn't run heavier. Spurted, sir, said Dr. Kemp. In another moment, the higher of the villas that had clambered up the hill from Burdock had occulted the running figure. He was visible again for a moment, and again, and then again, 3 times between the 3 detached houses that came next. And then the terrace hit him. Asses, said Dr. Kemp, swinging round on his heel and walking back to his writing table. But those who saw the fugitive nearer and perceived the abject terror on his perspiring face, being themselves in the open roadway, did not share in the doctor's contempt. By the man pounded, and as he ran he chinked like a well-filled purse that is tossed to and fro. He looked neither to the right nor to the left, but his eyes, dilated, stared straight downhill to where the lamps were being lit, and the people were crowded in the street, and his ill-shaped mouth fell apart, and a glary foam lay on his lips, and his breath came hoarse and noisy. All he passed stopped and began staring up the road and down, and interrogating one another with an inkling of discomfort for the reason of his haste. And then presently, far up the hill, a dog playing in the road yelped and ran under a gate. And as they still wondered something, a wind, a pad, 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 a sound like panting, breathing, rushed by. People screamed. People sprang off the pavement. It passed in shouts. It passed by instinct down the hill. They were shouting in the street before Marble was halfway there. They were bolting into houses and slamming the doors behind them with the news. He heard it and made one last desperate spurt. Fear came striding by, rushed ahead of him, and in a moment had seized the town. The Invisible Man is coming! The Invisible Man! Chapter 16. In the Jolly Cricketers. Nope, Cricketers. In the Jolly Cricketers. In quotations. The Jolly Cricketers is just at the bottom of the hill where the tram lines begin. The barman leaned his fat red arms on the counter and talked of horses with an anemic cabman, while a black-bearded man in gray snapped up biscuit and cheese, drank Burton, and conversed in American with a policeman off duty. "What's the shouting about?" said the anemic cabman, going off at a tangent, trying to see up the hill over the dirty yellow blind in the low window of the inn. "Somebody ran by outside. Fire, perhaps," said the barman. Footsteps approached, running heavily. The door was pushed open violently, and Marble, weeping and dishevelled, his hat gone, the neck of his coat torn open, rushed in, made a convulsive turn, and attempted to shut the door. It was held half open by a strap. "Coming!" he bawled, his voice shrieking with terror. "He's coming! The Visible Man! After me! For God's sake, help! Help! Help!" "Shut the door," said the policeman. "Who's coming? What's the row?" He went to the door, released the strap, and it slammed. The American closed the other door. "Let me go inside," said Marble, staggering and weeping, but still clutching the books. "Let me go inside. Lock me in somewhere. I tell you, he's after me. I give him the slip. He said he'd kill me, and he will." "You're safe," said the man with the black beard. "The door's shut. What's it all about?" "Let me go inside," said Marble, and shrieked aloud as a blow suddenly made the fastened door shiver and was followed by a hurried rapping and shouting outside. "Hello?" cried the policeman. "Who's there?" Mr. Marble began to make frantic dives at panels that looked like doors. "He'll kill me. He's got a knife or something. For God's sake." "Here you are," said the barman. "Come in here." And he held up the flap of the bar. Mr. Marble rushed behind the bar as the summons outside was repeated. "Don't open the door," he screamed. "Please don't open the door. Where shall I hide?" This invisible man, then?" asked the man with the black beard, with one hand behind him. "I guess it's about time we saw him." The window of the inn suddenly smashed in, and there was screaming and running to and fro in the street. The policeman had been standing on the settee, staring out, craning to see who was at the door. He got down with raised eyebrows. "It's that," he said. The barman stood in front of the bar parlor door, which was now locked on Mr. Marvel, stared at the smashed window, and came round to the two other men. Everything was suddenly quiet. "I wish I had my truncheon," said the policeman, going irresolutely to the door. "Once we open in he comes. There's no stopping him." "Don't you be in too much hurry about that door," said the anemic cabman anxiously. "Draw the bolts," said the man with the black beard, "and if he comes," he showed a revolver in his hand. "That won't do," said the policeman. "That's murder." "I know what country I'm in," said the man with the beard. "I'm going to let off at his legs. Draw the bolts." "Not with that blinking thing going off behind me," said the barman, craning over the blind. "Very well," said the man with the black beard, and stooping down, revolver ready, drew them himself. Barman, cabman, and policeman faced about. "Come in," said the bearded man in an undertone, standing back and facing the unbolted doors with his pistol behind him. No one came in. The door remained closed. 5 minutes afterwards, when a second cabman pushed his head in cautiously, they were still waiting, and an anxious face peered out of the bar parlor and supplied information. "Are all the doors of the house shut?" asked Marvel. "He's going round, prowling round. He's as artful as the devil." "Good Lord," said the burly barman. "There's the back. Just watch them doors. I say," he looked about him helplessly. The bar parlor door slammed, and they heard the key turn. "There's the yard door and the private door." The yard door. He rushed out of the bar. In a minute, he reappeared with a carving knife in his hand. "The yard door was open," he said, and his fat underlip dropped. "He may be in the house now," said the cabman. "He's not in the kitchen," said the barman. "There's 2 women there, and I've stabbed every inch of it with this little beef slicer, and they don't think he's come in. They haven't noticed." "Have you fastened it?" asked the cabman. "I'm out of frocks," said the barman. The man with the beard replaced his revolver, and even as he did so, the flap of the bar was shut down and the bolt clicked, and then, with a tremendous thud, the catch of the door snapped, and the bar parlor door burst open. They heard Marvel squeal like a caught leveret. Leveret? I don't know what that is. Let's look it up. Caught leveret. A young hare in its first year.
Leveret.
I guess it's a rabbit. Never heard the term leveret. Anyway. They heard Marvel squeal like a caught leveret, and forthwith they were clambering over the bar to his rescue. The bearded man's revolver cracked, and the looking glass at the back of the parlor starred and came smashing and tinkling down. As the barman entered the room, he saw Marvel, curiously crumpled up and struggling against the door that led to the yard and kitchen. The door flew open while the barman hesitated, and Marvel was dragged into the kitchen. There was a scream and a clatter of pans. Marvel, head down and lugging back obstinately, was forced to the kitchen door, and the bolts were drawn. Then the policeman, who had been trying to pass the barman, rushed in, followed by one of the cabmen, gripped the wrist of the invisible hand that collared Marvel, and was hit in the face and went reeling back. The door opened, and Marvel made a frantic effort to obtain a lodgment behind it. Then the cabman collared something. "I got him," said the cabman. The barman's red hands came clawing at the unseen. "Here he is," said the barman. Mr. Marvel, released, suddenly dropped to the ground and made an attempt to crawl behind the legs of the fighting men. The struggle blundered beyond the edge of the door. The voice of the invisible man was heard for the first time, yelling out sharply as the policeman trod on his foot. Then he cried out passionately and his fists flew round like flails. The cabman suddenly whooped and doubled up, kicked under the diaphragm. The door and the bar parlor from the kitchen slammed and covered Mr. Marvel's retreat. The men in the kitchen found themselves clutching at and struggling with empty air. "Where's he gone?" cried the man with the beard. "Out?" "This way," said the policeman, stepping into the yard and stopping. A piece of tile whizzed by his head and smashed along the crockery on the kitchen table. "I'll show him," shouted the man with the black beard, and suddenly a steel barrel shone over the policeman's shoulder, and 5 bullets had followed one another into the twilight whence the missile had come. As he fired, the man with the beard moved his hand in a horizontal curve, so that his shots radiated out into the narrow yard like spokes from a wheel. Silence followed. "5 cartridges," said the man with the black beard. "That's the best of all. 4 aces and a joker. Get a lantern, someone, and come a feel about for his body. Oh, I need a quarantini." Delightful. Chapter 17. Dr. Kemp's Visitor. Dr. Kemp had continued writing in his study until the shots aroused him. Crack, 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 they came, one after the other. "Hello?" said Dr. Kemp, putting his pen into his mouth again and listening. "Who's letting off revolvers in Burdock? What are the asses at now?" He went to the south window, threw it up, and leaning out, stared down on the network of windows, beaded gas lamps, and shops, with its black interstices of roof and yard that made up the town at night. "Looks like a crowd down the hill," he said, "by the cricketers," and remained watching. Thence his eyes wandered over the town to far away where the ship's lights shone, and the pier glowed, a little illuminated, faceted pavilion like a gem of yellowed light. The moon, in its first quarter, hung over the westward hill, and the stars were clear and almost tropically bright. After 5 minutes, during which his mind had traveled into a remote speculation of social conditions of the future and lost itself at last over the time dimension, Dr. Kemp roused himself with a sigh, pulled down the window again, and returned to his writing desk. It must have been about an hour after this that the front door bell rang. He had been writing slackly and with intervals of abstraction since the shots. He sat listening. He heard the servant answer the door and waited for her feet on the staircase, but she did not come. "Wonder what that was," said Dr. Kemp. He tried to resume his work, failed, got up, went downstairs from his study to the landing, rang, and called over the balustrade to the housemaid as she appeared in the hall below. "Was that a letter?" he asked. "Only a runaway ring, sir," she answered. "I'm restless tonight," he said to himself. He went back to his study, and this time attacked his work resolutely. In a little while he was hard at work again, and the only sounds in the room were the ticking of the clock and the subdued shrillness of his quill. Hurrying in the very center of the circle of light, his lampshade threw on his table. It was 2 o'clock before Dr. Kemp had finished his work for the night. He rose, yawned, and went downstairs to bed. He had already removed his coat and vest when he noticed that he was thirsty. He took a candle and went down to the dining room in search of a siphon and whiskey. Dr. Kemp's scientific pursuits have made him a very observant man, and as he recrossed the hall, he noticed a dark spot on the linoleum near the mat at the front of the stairs. He went on upstairs, and then it suddenly occurred to him to ask himself what the spot on the linoleum might be. Apparently, some subconscious element was at work. At any rate, he turned with his burden, went back to the hall, put down the siphon and whiskey, and, bending down, touched the spot. Without any great surprise, he found it had the stickiness and color of drying blood. Oh, hi, honey. 20 minutes, okay? Go ahead. He took up his burden again and returned upstairs, looking about him and trying to account for the blood spots. On the landing, he saw something and stopped, astonished. The door handle of his own room was blood-stained. He looked at his own hand. It was quite clean, and then he remembered that the door of his room had been open when he came down from his study, and that, consequently, he had not touched the handle at all. He went straight into his room, his face quite calm, perhaps a trifle more resolute than usual. His glance, wandering inquisitively, fell on the bed. On the counterpane was a mess of blood, and the sheet had been torn. He had not noticed this before because he had walked straight to the dressing table. On the further side, the bedclothes were depressed as if someone had been recently sitting there. Then he had an odd impression that he had heard a low voice say, "Good heavens, Kemp!" But Dr. Kemp was no believer in voices. He stood staring at the tumbled sheets. Was that really a voice? He looked about again, but noticed nothing further than the disordered and blood-stained bed. Then he distinctly heard a movement across the room near the wash-hand stand. All men, however highly educated, retained some superstitious inklings. The feeling that is called eerie came upon him. He closed the door of the room, came forward to the dressing table, and put down his burdens. Suddenly, with a start, he perceived a coiled and blood-stained bandage of linen rag hanging in midair between him and the wash-hand stand. He stared at this in amazement. It was an empty bandage, a bandage properly tied, but quite empty. He would have advanced to grasp it, but a touch arrested him, and a voice speaking quite close to him. "Kemp," said the voice. "Eh?" said Kemp with his mouth open. "Keep your nerve," said the voice. "I'm an invisible man." Kemp made no answer for a space, simply stared at the bandage. "Invisible man," he said. "I am an invisible man," repeated the voice. The story he had been active to ridicule only that morning rushed through Kemp's brain. He does not appear to have been either very much frightened or very greatly surprised at the moment. Realization came later. "I thought it was all a lie," he said. The thought uppermost in his mind was the reiterated arguments of the morning. "Have you a bandage on?" he asked. "Yes," said the invisible man. "Oh," said Kemp, and then roused himself. "I say," he said, "but this is nonsense. It's some trick." He stepped forward suddenly, and his hand, extended towards the bandage, met invisible fingers. He recoiled at the touch, and his color changed. "Keep steady, Kemp, for God's sake. I want help badly. Stop." The hand gripped his arm. He struck at it. "Kemp!" cried the voice. "Kemp, keep steady!" And the grip tightened. A frantic desire to free himself took possession of Kemp. The hand of the bandage man arm gripped his shoulder, and he was suddenly tripped and flung backwards upon the bed. He opened his mouth to shout, and the corner of the sheet was thrust between his teeth. The invisible man had him down grimly, but his arms were free, and he struck and tried to kick savagely. "Listen to reason, will you?" said the invisible man, sticking it to him in spite of pounding in the ribs. "By heaven, you'll madden me in a minute." "Lie still, you fool," bowled the invisible man in Kemp's ear. Kemp struggled for another moment and then lay still. "If you shout, I'll smash your face," said the invisible man, relieving his mouth. "I'm an invisible man. It's no foolishness and it's no magic. I really am an invisible man, and I want your help. I don't want to hurt you, but if you behave like a frantic rustic, I must. Don't you remember me, Kemp? Griffin of University College?" "Let me get up," said Kemp. "I'll stop where I am, and let me sit quiet for a minute." He sat up and felt his neck. I am Griffin of University College, and I've made myself invisible. I'm just an ordinary man, a man you have known, made invisible. Griffin? Said Kemp. Griffin, answered the voice. A younger student than you were, almost an albino, 6 feet high and broad with a pink and white face and red eyes, who won the medal for chemistry. I am confused, said Kemp. My brain is rioting. What has this to do with Griffin? I am Griffin, Kemp thought. It's horrible, he said, but what devilry must happen to make a man invisible? It's no devilry. It's a process, sane and intelligible enough. It's horrible, said Kemp. How on earth? It's horrible enough, but I'm wounded and in pain and tired. Great God, Kemp, you are a man. Take it steady. Give me some food and drink and let me sit down here. Kemp stared at the bandage as it moved across the room, then saw a basket chair dragged across the floor and come to rest near the bed. It creaked, and the seat was depressed the quarter of an inch or so. He rubbed his eyes and felt his neck again. This beats ghosts, he said and laughed stupidly. That's better. Thank heaven you're getting sensible. Or silly, said Kemp and knuckled his eyes. Give me some whiskey. I'm near dead. It didn't feel so. Where are you? If I get up, shall I run into you? There? All right. Whiskey? Here. Where shall I give it to you? The chair creaked and Kemp felt the glass drawn away from him. He let go by an effort. His instinct was all against it. It came to rest poised 20 inches above the front edge of the seat of the chair. He stared at it in infinite perplexity. This must be hypnotism. You have suggested you are invisible. Nonsense, said the voice. It's frantic. Listen to me. I demonstrated conclusively this morning, began Kemp, that invisibility... Never mind what you've demonstrated. I'm starving, said the voice, and the night is chilly to a man without clothes. Food? Said Kemp. The tumbler of whiskey tilted itself. Yes, said the invisible man, wrapping it down. Have you a dressing gown? Kemp made some exclamation in an undertone. He walked toward a He walked to a wardrobe and produced a robe of dingy scarlet. This do? He asked. It was taken from him. It hung limp for a moment in midair, fluttered weirdly, stood full and decorous, buttoning itself, and sat down in his chair. Drawers, socks, slippers would be a comfort, said the unseen, curtly. And food. Anything, but this is the insanest thing I ever was in my life. He turned out his drawers for the articles and then went downstairs to ransack his larder. He came back with some cold cutlets and bread, pulled up a light table, and placed them before his guest. Never mind knives, said his visitor, and a cutlet hung in midair with the sound of gnawing. Invisible, said Kemp, and sat down on a bedroom chair. I always like to get something about me before I eat, said the invisible man with a full mouth, eating greedily. Queer fancy. I suppose that wrist is all right, said Kemp. Trust me, said the invisible man. Of all the strange and wonderful. Exactly, but it's odd I should blunder into your house to get my bandaging. My first stroke of luck. Anyhow, I meant to sleep in this house tonight. You must stand that. It's a filthy nuisance, my blood showing, isn't it? Quite a clot over there. Gets visible as it coagulates, I see. It's the only living tissue I've changed, and only for as long as I'm alive. I've been in the house 3 hours. But how's it done? Began Kemp in a tone of exasperation. Confound it, the whole business. It's unreasonable from beginning to end. Quite reasonable, said the invisible man. Perfectly reasonable. He reached over and secured the whiskey bottle. Kemp stared at the devouring dressing gown. A ray of candlelight penetrating a torn patch in the right shoulder made a triangle of light under the left ribs. What were the shots? He asked. How did the shooting begin? There was a real fool of a man, a sort of confederate of mine, curse him, who tried to steal my money. Has done so. Is he invisible too? No. Well, can I have some more to eat before I tell you all that? I'm hungry and pain, and you want me to tell stories? Kemp got up. You didn't do any shooting? He asked. Not me, said his visitor. Some fool I'd never seen fired at random. A lot of them got scared. They all got scared at me. Curse them, I say. I want more to eat than this, Kemp. I'll see what there is to eat downstairs, said Kemp. Not much, I'm afraid. After he had done eating and made a heavy meal, the invisible man demanded a cigar. He bit the end savagely before Kemp could find a knife and cursed when the outer leaf loosened. It was strange to see him smoking. His mouth and throat, pharynx, and nares became visible as a sort of whirling smoke cast. This blessed gift of smoking, he said, and puffed vigorously. I'm lucky to have fallen upon you, Kemp. You must help me. Fancy tumbling on you just now. I'm in a devilish scrape. I've been mad, I think, the things I've been through. But we will do things yet, let me tell you. He helped himself to more whiskey and soda. Kemp got up, looked about him, and fetched a glass from his spare room. It's wild, but I suppose I may drink. You haven't changed much, Kemp, in these dozen years. You fair men don't. Cool and methodical after the first collapse. I must tell you, we will work together. But how was it all done? Said Kemp. And how did you get like this? For God's sake, let me smoke in peace for a little while, and then I will begin to tell you. But the story was not told that night. The invisible man's wrist was growing painful. He was feverish, exhausted. His mind came round to brood upon his chase down the hill and the struggle about the inn. He spoke in fragments of marvel. He smoked faster. His voice grew angry. Kemp tried to gather what he could. He was afraid of me. I could see that he was afraid of me, said the invisible man many times over. He meant to give me the slip. He was always casting about. What a fool I was. The cur! I should have killed him. Where did you get the money? Asked Kemp abruptly. The invisible man was silent for a space. I can't tell you tonight, he said. He groaned suddenly and leaned forward, supporting his invisible head on invisible hands. Kemp, he said, I've had no sleep for near 3 days, except a couple of dozes of an hour or so. I must sleep soon. Well, have this room. But how can I sleep? If I sleep, he will get away. Ugh, what does it matter? What's the shot wound? Asked Kemp abruptly. Nothing. Scratch and blood. Oh, God, I want sleep. Why not? The invisible man appeared to be regarding Kemp. Because I have got particular objection to being caught by my fellow men, he said slowly. Kemp started. Fool that I am, said the invisible man, striking the table smartly. I've put the idea into your head. Oh, I could do one more chapter. Chapter 18. The Invisible Man Sleeps. Exhausted and wounded as the Invisible Man was, he refused to accept Kemp's word that his freedom should be respected. He examined the 2 windows of the bedroom, drew up the blinds, and opened the sashes to confirm Kemp's statement that a retreat by them would be impossible. Outside, the night was very quiet and still, and the new moon was setting over the town. Then he examined the keys of the bedroom and the 2 dressing room doors, and to satisfy himself that these also could be made in assurance of freedom. Finally, he expressed himself, satisfied. He stood on the hearthrug, and Kemp heard the sound of a yawn. I'm sorry, said the invisible man, if I cannot tell you all that I have done tonight, but I am worn out. It's grotesque, no doubt. It's horrible. But believe me, Kemp, in spite of your arguments of this morning, it is quite a possible thing. I've made a discovery. I mean to keep it to myself. I can't. I must have a partner, and you. We can do such things, but tomorrow. Now, Kemp, I feel as though I must sleep or perish. Kemp stood in the middle of the room, staring at the headless garment. I suppose I must leave you, he said. It's incredible. 3 things happening like this, overturning all my preconceptions. Would make me insane, but it's real. Is there anything more that I can get you? Only bid me good night, said Griffin. Good night, said Kemp, and shook an invisible hand. He walked sideways to the door. Suddenly the dressing gown walked quickly towards him. Understand me, said the dressing gown. No one attempts to hamper me or capture me or... Kemp's face changed a little. I thought I gave you my word, he said. Kemp closed the door softly behind him, and the key was turned upon him forthwith. Then, as he stood with an expression of passive amazement on his face, the rapid feet came to the door of the dressing room, and that too was locked. Kemp slapped his brow with his hand. Am I dreaming? Has the world gone mad, or have I? He laughed and put his hand to the locked door. Barred out of my own bedroom by flagrant absurdity, he said. He walked to the head of the staircase, turned and stared at the locked doors. It's fact, he said. He put his fingers to his slightly bruised neck. Undeniable fact. But... He shook his head hopelessly, turned, and went downstairs. He lit the dining room lamp, got out a cigar, and began pacing the room, ejaculating. Now and then he would argue with himself. Invisible, he said. Is there such a thing as an invisible animal? In the sea, yes. Thousands, millions. All the larvae, all the little naupli and tornarias, all the microscopic things, the jellyfish. In the sea there are more things invisible than visible. I never thought of that before. And in the ponds, too. All those little pond-life things, specks of colorless, translucent jelly. But in air, no, it can't be. But after all, why not? If a man was made of glass, he would still be visible. His meditation became profound. The bulk of 3 cigars had passed into the invisible or diffused as a white ash over the carpet before he spoke again. Then it was merely an exclamation. He turned aside, walked out of the room, and went into his little consulting room and lit the gas there. It was a little room because Dr. Kemp did not live by practice. And in it were the day's newspapers. The morning's paper lay carelessly opened and thrown aside. He caught it up, turned it over, and read the account of a strange story from I Ping that the mariner at Port Stowe had spelt over so painfully to Mr. Marvel. Kemp read it swiftly. Wrapped up, said Kemp. Disguised, hiding it. No one seemed to have been aware of his misfortune. What the devil is his game? He dropped the paper, and his eye went seeking. Ah, he said, and caught up the St. James Gazette, lying folded up as it arrived. Now we shall get at the truth, said Dr. Kemp. He rent the paper open. A couple of columns confronted him. An entire village in Sussex goes mad, was the heading. Good heavens, said Kemp, reading eagerly an incredulous account of the evenings in I Ping of the previous afternoon that have already been described. Over the leaf, the report in the morning paper had been reprinted. He reread it, ran through the streets, striking right and left. Jaffers insensible, Mr. Huckster in great pain, still unable to describe what he saw. Painful humiliation, vicar, woman ill with terror, window smashed. This extraordinary story probably a fabrication. Too good not to print. Cum grano. What? That might be Latin. Let me see what that is. Cum grano. Hold on a sec. I gotta find that. Yeah, Latin. With a grain of salt. With skepticism. Cum grano. That's new. Ugh. He dropped the paper and stared blankly in front of him. Probably a fabrication. He caught up the paper again and reread the whole business. But when does the tramp come in? Why the deuce was he chasing a tramp? He sat down abruptly on the surgical bench. He's not only invisible, he said, but he's mad, homicidal. When dawn came to mingle its pallor with the limp lights and cigar smoke of the dining room, Kemp was still pacing up and down, trying to grasp the incredible. He was altogether too excited to sleep. His servants, descending sleepily, discovered him, and were inclined to think that overstudy had worked his will on him. He gave them extraordinary but quite explicit instructions to lay breakfast for two in the Belvedere study, and then to confine themselves to the basement and ground floor. Then he continued to pace the dining room until the morning's paper came. That had much to say and little to tell, beyond the confirmation of the evening before, and a very badly written account of another remarkable tale from Port Burdock. This gave Kemp the essence of the happenings at the Jolly Cricketers, and the name of Marvel. He has made me keep with him 24 hours, Marvel testified. Certain minor facts were added to the I Ping story, notably the cutting of the village telegraph wire. But there was nothing to throw light on the connection between the Invisible Man and the tramp. For Mr. Marvel had supplied no information about the 3 books or the money with which he was lined. The incredulous tone had vanished, and a shoal of reporters and inquirers were already at work elaborating the matter. Kemp read every scrap of the report and sent his housemaid out to get every one of the morning papers she could. These he also devoured. "He is invisible," he said, "and it reads like rage growing to mania. The things he may do, and he's upstairs free as the air. What on earth ought I to do? For instance, would it be a breach of faith if... No." He went to a little untidy desk in the corner and began a note. He tore this up half-written and wrote another. He read it over and over and considered it. Then he took an envelope and addressed it to Colonel Adye, Port Burdock. The Invisible Man awoke even as Kemp was doing this. He awoke in an evil temper, and Kemp, alert for every sound, heard his pattering feet rush suddenly across the bedroom overhead. Then a chair was flung over, and the wash-hand stand tumbler smashed. Kemp hurried upstairs and rapped eagerly. All right, I'm going to stop there tonight. Thank you for joining me.